we happen to have a very, very special guest on today, one that I am so excited to have on. Dave and I actually met a long time ago and have been friends throughout our careers. But Dave was literally at the birth of rock and roll. He has been the guy that came up with ideas that we all take for granted, like selling memorabilia and swag at outdoor rock concerts, which revolutionized merchandise sales through strategic partnerships, including a pivotal deal with Hard Rock Cafe, eventually selling that enterprise to MCA. He has been a tour manager for people we all know, for legendary artists like Bob Dylan, Neil Diamond, John Denver. He has handled production programs for musicians, including Billy Joel, Madonna, Bruce Springsteen, the Rolling Stones, U2. I could go on and on and on. Dave, welcome. Why don't you tell people about how you started briefly and then how you ended up in the rock and roll business?
It's a pleasure to be here. And it's great to see you and think back 50 years, really 52 or 3, somewhere in there. In 1965, I graduated from high school in Nevada City, and I promised my father that I would go to mortuary college because he bought a funeral home, and he thought that would be a good business for me. And but I hated it. But right down the street from the mortuary college was this building called Winterland. And Winterland was the home of an ice show. And and this ice show toured for 40 weeks a year around the United States. And there were 100 ice skater girls in this show. And oh, wouldn't that be nice if I could get a job working for them, traveling around the United States? Well, that's what happened. And I'm going to fast forward. I went to work for that ice show, first handling merchandise and some great stories, and all entrepreneurial. And, because we're talking to entrepreneurs, you got to take risks in life. And I had asked the boss, the owner of the ice show, if I tell you how I can double your profits in merchandise, would you give me a job going on the road? And he said, probably not. What's your idea? And I said, well, I double the price of the program from 25 cents to 50 cents. He says, no, we've got a Harvard MBA CEO. He thinks that program, that's a publicity tool, and we want to get it into the hands of as many people as possible. And, shut me right down. Well, 2 weeks later, he and that Harvard CEO, they left to do an advance trip, and I raised the price of the program to $1. And every day I took the extra 75 cents and I put them, all in dollar bills. I put them in an envelope and gave it to the boss's secretary. He said, you're going to hold on to these so that people know that what I'm doing when I reveal it to him when he gets back. Well, when he got back a week or so later, I put a whole stack of envelopes on his desk and had $15,000 in it. And he said, you insubordinate son of a bitch, I ought to fire you right now. But I'm not gonna. I'm gonna make you general manager of the merchandise, and you're going on the road. Oh my God. That was just the biggest news for a guy that was in mortuary college. And 2 weeks later, I got my draft notice. And so fortunately, he held that opportunity while I went and joined the Army for a couple of years. But I got out in 1967. I got to go on the road with that ice show, and I got bored just doing the merchandise. And I asked them if they'd train me in being a box office manager. Now, the buildings that we were going to were Madison Square Garden, Boston Garden, Toronto Maple Leafs, Chicago Stadium, the biggest buildings in the United States. And I was learning this craft of how to settle a box office. And I didn't know that I was going to get dispatched back to Winterland in 1971 on Memorial Day weekend, the Grateful Dead put LSD in the water. Well, a couple of the roadies for the Grateful Dead put LSD in the water, and were dispensing it out to the kids in the audience, and several thousand of them overdosed, and it was a real problem. They closed a building, and I was sent down there by that same boss that hired me earlier. Said, get that building open for me for our summer show. And oh, by the way, you're the new general manager and you're going to stay there and run those rock and roll shows. This new rock and roll that was going on in Winterland was, oh my gosh, there's 5,000 kids out in a line every day to come in. And oh, by the way, they're smoking marijuana. And so I didn't know until 1974 on the Bob Dylan tour. Bob calls a meeting after the show at the hospitality suite. So we're at the hospitality suite. We all move into the room next door, and it has 2 double beds in it. And I sit up by the headboard, and Bob Dylan comes and sits right next to me. And then Bill Graham sits next to him. The 5 members of the band, they all sit on the bed right in front of us. And in the room is David Geffen, David Braun, and Marshall Gelfand. These are 3 impresarios for sure. And Bob lights up a joint and hands it to the guy on the right, which is me. And these guys know I don't do drugs of any kind. Okay, that's just my shtick. I handle the money. That's my job. I do the box office, and I don't do drugs. Well, I flashed, are you going to tell your children that Bob Dylan passed you a joint and you didn't take a puff? No, I took a puff, just a quick one. And I passed it over to the band, and all 5 guys in the band, they took a puff. David Geffen waved it off. Marshall Gelfand waved it off. David Braun, Bob's attorney, waved it off. Then it went to Bill Graham. Bill took a puff. Well, it was almost like an executive board meeting. We determined who the puffers were and the non-puffers. And, fortunately, I got to be in that particular group. And the epiphany that I experienced, Gary, is all those nights working at Winterland, I'd walk around the building, 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock at night going, gee, I just love my job. I'm so lucky to be in this business and walking around. I was high with clear the air in the building. I didn't smoke, but I just breathed the air. But I couldn't compare that feeling until I actually did it when I had that epiphany. And
So how did you bridge? How did you figure out that, gee, maybe we ought to 5,000 people is great, but maybe we ought to fill a stadium and do an outdoor rock concert instead of an indoor rock concert? Tell me about that.
We did concerts all around the Bay Area and Oakland Coliseum, the Cow Palace, San Jose, and right next to the Oakland arena was a stadium, the Oakland Stadium, and they really liked us coming over there and renting the building and doing these rock concerts, and so we made a deal with them to do a big show. The British are coming, or something like that, and Peter Frampton, Doobie Brothers, Santana. It was called Day on the Green. And, the tickets were only $10. So we'd sell 50,000 tickets. And, it was a $500,000 gross, not counting food and beverage and merchandise. And, by then the merchandise business had started to become significant. My brother and I, he never liked me using this term, but we were bootlegging T-shirts up in the lobby, meaning that we just made a T-shirt of the bands that were coming in to the building, and we put all the bands on the T-shirt, and it's called an event shirt. And boy, they just sold like hotcakes. And but this night, the Rolling Stones and Stevie Wonder were doing a makeup show for Altamont. June of 1972. And so I said to Dell, let's go back and give Peter Rudge. I knew the manager pretty well, the Rolling Stones, because we were doing Rolling Stones dates all over the West. And I said, let's go back and give him $1,000 as a royalty and see if he won't let us sell T-shirts for the Rolling Stones. Well, we took him back $1,000, gave him 10 T-shirts, told him that we could do it for him every night. He shook our hands. We worked for the Rolling Stones for the next 30 years on that handshake. That handshake, and it got passed on to different managers. But the merchandise guys on the road, there's a unique, believe it or not, the artists themselves, what do they give their family and friends when you come to the show? They ask for the merch guy to come down. They summon him down to backstage. Hey, look, I got my mom coming. I got my brother and sisters. I need, get them swag bags. And so we would put these, and so the merch guy ends up really becoming an integral part of a tour. And I didn't know how that was going to, affect my future life. But it really did.
You have to worry about, if you're in charge of the money, that it could get loosey goosey with all the cash, because it's all cash changing hands. I mean, how did you figure that one out?
Hey, this was all cash in those days. And I'm going to quote Shep Gordon. And for all of the people that are watching this, please watch the documentary Supermensch. Supermensch is a documentary about Shep Gordon. And it's just a fabulous movie. He's Alice Cooper's manager and one of the great artist managers of our time, and one of the great human beings that I know. But his job, he describes the manager's job as, number one, don't forget to get the money. Number two, never forget to get the money. Number three, don't ever forget 1 and 2. And so getting the money, the money goes down at the halftime when the headliner goes on the show. In those days, you're in the box office and you're being presented with expenses of the ushers, the ticket takers, the security guards. It's like checking out of a hotel. All the bills are being assembled, and they, usually going to have lengthy discussions about, why am I paying for that? And why am I paying for that? And why am I paying for that? At the end of the night, if the gross was $500,000, they've got the whole 500,000. So let's say they have 20% expenses. That means we're going to walk out with, 80% of 500,000.
Yeah.
And we're going to put it in a suitcase. Cause we didn't even we got Brinks in later, and we just couldn't keep carrying around those amounts of money, but, it was all cash. And yeah, so we had to keep good track of it for sure. And we had heavy accounting responsibilities to all of the partners that participate.
Sure. So that's fascinating. So you literally, from mortuary college to traveling on the road to kind of see concerts, to being in charge of the concerts and to learn it from the ground up. I mean, that's kind of what entrepreneurs do. If you think about it, you were doing it with people like Bob Dylan and Mick Jagger, and where other people were doing it with maybe not those folks, but you were climbing the same ladder, frankly, weren't you?
Well, Gary, back in those days, you were the one that I had the respect for. You were building, cosmetic companies and launching your career. And we were just so impressed with you. I know we tried to recruit you once to come and be president.
Yeah, I wrote about that in my book.
Yeah, our T-shirt company. And you sent us over your pal who did a great job. And
but there's this saying, you don't know what you don't know, and then once you know it, then you can't ever remember not knowing what you now know. I didn't know I really did not know what being an entrepreneur was. But the thing that always struck me about you, you are very intellectually curious. You are always asking questions and you will sit down and dig in because you're trying to figure out how things work that you don't know how they work. And that and that was the first time I was ever around anyone like you that it was liberating to me to go, oh, wait a second. I can question why things are done the way they're done, or I can decide that maybe we should do it a different way, or maybe it's time to pivot, for instance. I mean, this is probably a good point to talk about when you decided to pivot away from the kind of the Bill Graham world, but because of what you knew in the rock and roll world, that there was a way to pivot into something even bigger and better. Talk about that. And did you sleepless nights? Did you have a knot in your stomach for a month? I mean, tell me about that.
No, I had such a great career in San Francisco, and it was Bill Graham was a highly volatile guy and known for yelling and screaming and getting really wild. And we had a disagreement one night, and I I decided that maybe I would go to work for someone else. There was a guy that had been courting me. His name was Jerry Weintraub. Jerry was making movies. He was doing really special things. He was managing huge bands and the largest management company in Los Angeles. And he said, if you ever leave Bill, I'd love you to be president of my company. And so I made the call. And the next day I went down there, we shook hands, and I went to work for Jerry. And he might have made me president of his company, but I think he had 3 or 4 presidents of his company. Guys like me were in charge of clients, big clients. My clients were Bob Dylan, Neil Diamond, and John Denver. And they really required daily attention. Their businesses are big. Their tours were big. They were world tours. And so I'd had a relationship with Bob earlier, doing the Bob Dylan and band tours. But I got to tell a funny vignette here, Gary, because it involves Texas. So right after we finished the Bob Dylan and band tour, David Geffen summons us back to Los Angeles, and he says, I want you to do another tour, but I want it to be a stadium tour for Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Young. And I want to do it this summer. Well, we just got finished with his tour, and it was like April or May, and getting a tour mounted for the summertime and a stadium tour. Those are huge, undertakings. So I said to Bill on our way back from the meeting with David Geffen, look at Bill, I'm going to tell you what, I'm going to get a suitcase with $100,000 in it. I'm going to fly into the 12, 15 biggest cities in the United States. I'm going to rent a helicopter, and I'm going to fly around. I'm going to land where I think we can, get 70, 80, 90,000 people. And one of those places was Irving Stadium in Dallas, the one with the hole in the roof. So
Yep.
I land out in that parking lot, and I get my suitcase. The helicopter lands, I get my suitcase. I go in the manager's office and say to the receptionist, is the manager in? I'd like to talk to him about renting the building. And she kind of snickers, and then she buzzes the manager. The manager comes out and he says, you don't have enough money to rent this building. Kind of snickered at me, and I put my briefcase up on the counter. I said, well, I got enough to make a deposit. And he saw the $100,000. He invited me into his office. We sat down. Then he gave me 10 or 12 dates that I could pick. And then, so once I did this tour, I had to do this tour like in 2 weeks. I mean, it was a heavy paced couple of cities in one day to get back and then route a stadium tour. And that stadium tour, Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, 1974, has been immortalized. There's been movies about it and albums about it.
No, this is great. Now, so tell me, because I don't know the details, but you were clearly you make things happen, and that's why you kept following up in your career. And tell me the connection. You had told me a story about how you helped the guys at the Hard Rock Cafe think about what was the real potential and how you kept that in your head for a decade or more and came up with as your most recent act, Rock and Brews. Give
Yeah,
the
well,
listeners a little story there.
okay, well, it was 1978. We're doing a world tour with John Duchendorf, also John Denver, but his real name is John Duchendorf, and Voice of America. And we're in London, and John wants to go to this new hamburger joint called the Hard Rock Cafe. And it's got really long lines. So I got I'm the tour manager. I got to call over there and say, hey, gee, John wants to come to lunch. And I speak to this guy. His name is Peter Morton, young guy, my age at the time. And so we go over to the Hard Rock. We meet Peter, and Peter says, hey, after the show tonight, why don't you come to Dad's? And John says, oh, gee, that'd be great. And I'm thinking to myself, well, who's Dad and where is it? Well, it turns out it's Morton's of London. And Peter Morton is the son of the Morton restaurant empire. And so Peter, that night after the show, while we're having dinner, I say to him, I can get you memorabilia for your restaurants because we do the merch for these tours. And so we're out on the road with these artists, and I can get memorabilia, guitars and instruments and clothing, blah, blah, blah. And he goes, great. But it was just one of those kind of casual bullshit conversations. You never know if anything's going to come of it. Well, as soon as I get back to the United States, within weeks, I'm doing a Bob Dylan tour, and the roadie comes up to me, Bob's roadie, and he says, hey, I need some money for some instruments for Bob. And I said, hey, whatever you're buying for Bob, buy some extras for me. And oh, by the way, I'm going to need a Polaroid of Bob blowing on that harmonica. And I bought a little box of harmonicas. Well, as soon as I get the Polaroid and the box of harmonicas, I send them over to Peter Morton. And Peter makes these big 4x4 platinum album plaques blowing in the wind. Bob Dylan, his harmonica. And Peter is just so happy with this and wants more. He wants, he's got all these restaurants opening up, plus he's got a backfill. He wants to put this new cool stuff in all of his restaurants. So we start getting him guitars. Every time the roadie goes out, and we'll buy all the guitars. We'll buy all new guitars. We want all the old guitars. We're giving them all to Peter. And Peter bought $100 million worth of T-shirts from us. And you mentioned earlier, we sold the company on the back of that contract to MCA. That was Sid Sheinberg and Lou Wasserman. And, that's where a couple of young guys learn, guys that are all entrepreneurs, going to work for a public company and stand out in front of Sid Sheinberg and Lou Wasserman. They have one page of your company in their binder. They have a full binder of all the companies. I'll sit there and they turn the page. Hi, boys. Well, you said the last meeting you're going to do this, this, and this. How have you done? Boy, I got to tell you, you better be over your estimate from the last meeting. Because if you're under, you're a surprise to them, and they don't like surprises. In fact, they dislike surprises so much, you feel like that you're eviscerated in the meeting, and you walk out of the meeting with your head down, hoping that you live for another quarter.
And guess what? Jack Welch, just the same thing. All the greatest business people in history, you knew if you worked for them in their organization, you better be darn sure whatever you tell them you're going to do next year, that you deliver on it. And that, I mean, that's how business works.
Oh yeah,
And you blew it out.
well, hey, we learned that we were going to be less euphoric and a little more conservative in our projection, and because and working for a public company, that's a whole other level of responsibility.
So how do you take that? Tell me about the genesis of Rock and Brew, because all of our listeners now, I mean, that's a new, I'm not sure when you started that, but it's still up, running, growing, and quite
No,
the spectacle. So tell it, how did you bridge from MCA into, and you should talk about Paul Stanley and Gene Simmons, and how did you think them when you had the whole world? How did this thing come together?
well, that the Sony signatures happened in 1994. Peter Uber,
Uberoff.
no, Peter Goober, Peter
Okay.
Goober gave us $54 million to form Sony signatures and open a flagship store for the new Sony building, which was the old American Express building on Madison Avenue in New York. And my brother and I had our biggest disagreement over this issue. I knew we had to put a bar, restaurant, music venue in there. And he, and I don't mean to be picking on you Harvard guys. He and our Harvard MBA that he had hired to run the company, really wanted it to be more of a merch stop, more like a Warner Brothers store, a Disney store. And, but I was really pretty sure we needed to be a whole lot hipper. And we were done with our Hard Rock Cafe responsibilities. We'd sold the company to MCA, but I always wanted to be in that business. People don't realize the Hard Rock Cafe would gross $60,000 a day. 40,000 of it was merchandise and 20,000 of it was food and beverage. So they had lines down the street for people to come up to buy that Hard Rock t-shirt that we were selling to Peter. So I really wanted to open a rock and roll themed restaurant and sell t-shirts in it. I wanted to take my money and open a restaurant chain and try to do what Peter Morton did. And so as Rock and Brews was all coming together, that's who we were going to be. And the restaurant business is, really had some hard times since the pandemic. The baby boomers have, cut back. They don't go out as much. There's not as much drinking. People are doing other things. And so, but lucky for us, we started going into casinos and putting our Rock and Brews concert bar right in the middle of the casinos. And we really pick up the gambling when we do that. I mean, if there's a 1,000 slot machine casino on the left and we're over on the one on the right, ours does 1.5 times the one on the left, because there's live music going on. And old hippies, the people that are gambling, you know what they like? They like music. They like concerts. They like classic rock and roll and new music as well.
And you said something that started this, which I am sensitive to, where you said, we got lucky and went to casinos. And the fact is, and you and I go way back together, but we haven't spent this kind of time talking in a lot of time. And you don't, I don't think that you truly internalize. You are so intentional. You aren't lucky. You have never been lucky. You have been intentional. And that's something that is really important to have in an entrepreneur who's going to be successful. And as you and and as we talk about wrapping up here, I would love your advice to our listeners, and I think they will see. I don't even know, what you're going to say, but I'm telling you, it's intention. I've heard you say before, you've fallen up into everything you've ever done. It wasn't a lucky guess, it was intention. And I talk to entrepreneurs about that a lot. And I talk about that a lot in my book. And so don't sell yourself short, Dave Furano.
Well, Gary, you said something in an earlier call where you really don't know what's around the corner. Well, I've been saying you don't know what's on the other side till you get on the top. And I couldn't understand why these casinos were willing to spend $10 million to put our big old concert stage and restaurants in their casinos until we started requiring to have financials of the surrounding area so we knew what was going on. Well, it turns out that casinos give away food to draw you into the casino. It's not the amount of money that they make in your restaurant, it's the amount of money that they make in gambling. And, gambling has margins that are just not like regular companies. And so till I saw that and said, well, they're taking advantage of us. Is the first thing that I thought, well, darn it, they're only paying us a little bit. We're creating all that value for them. So we started asking for more. And
but you were intellectually curious. You got into the numbers with them. You learned something. You realized you had the epiphany. Oh my, we're giving it away. And then you did something about it. Let's, for our entrepreneurs who are on their journeys and people thinking about things, I'd love for you to boil down kind of a handful of what were the biggest kind of lessons that you've learned in your career that have held you in the best stead. Could you run me through some of your entrepreneurial wisdom?
Yeah. 99% of the time, your first answer is no. It could be hell no, fuck no, 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 no. Do not be deterred by this. This is a test of what are you going to do now? Because, and I used to dress rehearse on my brother. My brother is the no in Furano, and he just said no. He just said no to everything. And when you're doing deals with rock and roll merchandisers that are lying to you and they're telling you that we're going to have 1 million people and they're really only going to have 500,000 people. And, you have to know that they're not lying to you. They actually believed that they were going to do 1 million people. They were just wrong. And, things are not as good. So do not take no as the answer. And if that was the answer, it was because you are not good enough to get a yes. And you have to figure out what it's going to take to get seasoned. I'm telling you, the best businessmen in the world, they're going to tell you no, 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 no. And it's persistence, hard work, and oh my gosh, try to work on things that you love so that it's just working all day is a joy if you pick the right job.
Well, Dave, I can't tell you how much I appreciate this time with you. And I'm thinking of guests that we've had, other entrepreneurs, and they were early in their journeys. But one thing that you just have been saying that I hear from all of the successful ones that we talk to, you are so right. You hear no. Everyone tells you no. And then they tell you, well, we're not introducing you to the big guy because he's just going to tell you no. So we're telling you no. So, I mean, when my partners that I started GameStop with, we tried to get in that first mall for our first store, and no one would see us. And so we went and we waited until this guy, his name's Ray Nasher. We thought we knew where his car was. We hung out. We saw it where it was. And then we came back. We got all organized, and we came back the next day or next week or whenever we did it. And we waited for him. And when he came out to his car to leave, we popped up and said, "Hey, Ray, you don't know us, but we got this idea." And, GameStop happened, but it wouldn't have happened if we wouldn't have sat on our car waiting for that guy to leave work to go home. That's what you have to do.
Well, Gary, no is the challenge of daily life. How do we turn that into a yes?
And that's fun. It's fun. This is just great. This recharged me up now. I need to go do something productive. I mean, you're out there just kicking it again. And
Gary, I do have a new dream that I'll share with all your entrepreneurs. I want to do the world's greatest house bands in the music venues around the United States and have an annual competition. They have these competitions for singers and for, talented individuals, but a band is a unique thing. The Rolling Stones, the Beatles, they're the sum total of harmony and perfection. And so I'm looking forward to I'm going to do it in our concert bars, the world's greatest house band. So that's one of my new projects. And
I will look for that. And I really appreciate you spending the time with us today. There's so much here that I know our listeners that will benefit from. And thank you for being here, and look forward to getting this out there, closing this leveling up with Gary and Jill.
Thank you, Gary.
That's it for today's episode of Leveling Up with Gary and Jill. Thanks for joining us. And don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this podcast. For more inspiring stories and breakthrough moments, visit GaryandJillPodcast.com. See you next episode.